But in the years after Michael Jackson's death, something began to shift. At first, it was subtle. A comment here, an interview there. But slowly, the people closest to the story started speaking out. And what they said didn't just add detail, it changed everything. The version the world thought it understood began to fall apart, piece by piece. And right at the center of it all was his daughter, Paris Jackson. But here's the uncomfortable question. Were people actually searching for truth, or just a story that felt more dramatic? For decades, Michael Jackson had existed almost beyond reality. A global icon. A figure so famous that his personal life felt more like myth than fact. So when he quietly married Debbie Rowe in November 1996, it didn't fit the image people had in their heads. There was no fairy tale, no public romance. Debbie wasn't a celebrity. She was a dermatology nurse who had known Michael for years through his doctor. And then suddenly, they were married.
No build-up. No explanation.
Just a decision that raised more questions than answers. But what kind of marriage begins without a story? The explanation that slowly surfaced was simple, at least on the surface. Michael wanted children. He had talked about it privately for years. He wanted a family that existed away from cameras and chaos. Debbie, who cared about him deeply, agreed to help make that happen. It sounded straightforward, almost selfless. But even then, something about it felt incomplete. Was this really a marriage, or something else entirely? Their son Prince was born in 1997. A year later, Paris arrived. She was born at a private clinic in Beverly Hills and named, according to some accounts, after the city where she was conceived. On paper, everything was clear. Michael was listed as the father. Legally, he was recognized as such. And by the year 2000, the marriage was over. Debbie signed over full custody, accepted a financial settlement, and stepped out of the spotlight. It looked like a closed chapter. Clean. Final. But was it ever really that simple? Because what no one expected was what came next. Within a decade, the people connected to those births would begin telling very different versions of the same story. And once those contradictions surfaced, they didn't just raise questions, they multiplied them. And when Michael Jackson died in 2009, those questions didn't stay quiet anymore. They exploded. The grief that followed his death was global. Millions mourned him. But behind that grief, another conversation was building. One that had been whispered for years but never fully addressed. Now, with Michael gone, there was no one left to deflect it. And within weeks, Debbie Rowe spoke publicly. What she said hit like a shockwave. She described their marriage not as a love story, but as a kind of arrangement. Said they never shared a bed. Claimed she had been paid to carry children through artificial insemination. And then came the line that changed everything. The donor was not necessarily Michael. Just like that, doubt was planted in a way that couldn't be undone. But why reveal something like that at that moment? The media didn't hesitate. Headlines spread instantly. Speculation turned into a frenzy. Suddenly, the identity of Michael Jackson's children became a global debate. But here's where the story becomes even more complicated. Debbie's statements didn't stay consistent. In later interviews, she confirmed she was the biological mother. She reconnected with Paris years later. Their relationship grew close again. It was a completely different tone. A completely different narrative. So which version was the truth? And just when it seemed like the story couldn't get more confusing, two other names entered the conversation. The first was Mark Lester, a British actor and longtime friend of Michael. Not just a casual acquaintance, someone trusted enough to be named Paris's godfather. Shortly after Michael's death, Lester made a claim that stunned people. He said he had donated sperm to Michael years earlier, that there was a real possibility he could be the biological father. He even pointed to similarities between Paris and his own daughter, offered to take a DNA test. But what made him come forward then, of all times? Then there was Dr. Arnold Klein, a man who had been part of Michael's life for decades. His dermatologist. Debbie Rowe's employer, a figure who was already deeply connected to the story. When asked directly if he was the biological father, his answer wasn't a simple no. It was careful, measured, almost designed to avoid closing the door completely. And years later, a single social media post brought everything back into focus, a side-by-side comparison of himself and Prince, with one cryptic letter as a caption. H. Then it vanished. But by then, the damage was done. So was it a coincidence? Or something more deliberate? Over time, those claims began to lose clarity. Lester softened his statements. Klein passed away. No definitive answers ever came. Just a cloud of speculation that refused to fully disappear. But while the world argued, debated, and speculated, Paris Jackson was growing up inside that noise. And that's where the story becomes less about mystery and more about impact. She was 11 when her father died. Think about that for a moment. At an age when most children are still figuring out the basics of who they are, Paris was suddenly placed under microscope. By the time she was a teenager, her name wasn't just in headlines, it was in questions. Questions about her identity, her family, her very existence. But how do you answer questions that should never have been asked in the first place? Her appearance became part of the conversation. Blue eyes, light skin, features people pointed to as evidence. As if genetics were that simple. As if identity could be reduced to a photograph. Every image of her was analyzed. Every interview dissected. The world wasn't just watching her grow up, it was judging whether she made sense. But what does that do to someone trying to understand themselves? By her mid-teens, Paris had already faced a series of struggles that would overwhelm most adults. Mental health battles, addiction, trauma she would later speak about openly. And all of it happened under the weight of constant scrutiny. Every time she tried to move forward, another wave of speculation pulled her back. It became a cycle. One that had very little to do with truth, and everything to do with attention. So where was the line between public interest and personal harm? In 2017, Paris decided to draw that line herself. She sat down for an interview and addressed the question directly.
No hesitation. No ambiguity.
She said Michael Jackson was her father. That he always had been. That he always would be. She spoke about how he raised her. What he taught her. How he shaped her understanding of identity. She said she considered herself black because that's what her father told her, and she trusted him. It was calm, clear, grounded, and for a moment, it seemed like the conversation might finally settle. But did it? Not entirely. Because years later, it all came back again. A single line from a television role sparked a new wave of discussion. Social media lit up. Old theories resurfaced. The same debate, recycled once more. But this time, Paris didn't respond with another interview. She didn't try to re-explain herself. Instead, she focused on something else entirely, building her own life. She stepped into music, into modeling, into acting. She spoke openly about her past, connecting with people who saw parts of their own struggles in her story. She created a space for herself that wasn't defined by her father's legacy, but also didn't deny it. It was something new, something personal. And maybe that was the most powerful response she could give. But would people see it that way? Around that same time, supposed DNA leaks began circulating online. Screenshots claiming to reveal the truth. Viral posts presenting unverified results as fact. But none of it held up under scrutiny. No credible sources. No confirmed labs. Just digital noise designed to spread quickly and widely. And the reality was clear. This wasn't about answers. It was about attention. But how do you fight something that doesn't need to be true to be believed? Through all of this, Paris remained consistent. Not loud. Not defensive. Just steady. She repeated the same message in different ways over the years. Michael Jackson was her father. Not because of biology proven on paper, but because of the life he gave her, the love he showed her, the values he passed down. And for her, that definition didn't need validation from anyone else. But why does the world struggle to accept that? Because when you step back, the question people keep asking, who is her real father, starts to feel misplaced. Maybe the issue was never about biology alone. Maybe it was about how people defined family in the first place. Is it DNA? Or is it the person who was there, day after day, shaping who you become? Paris has answered that question in the only way that matters to her. Through her words. Through her choices. Through the life she continues to build. And despite everything, the rumors, the headlines, the endless speculation, her answer has never changed. Not once. And that consistency says more than any theory ever could. But here's the final question. Why is it still so hard for people to let that answer be enough? Because in the end, this was never just about a mystery. It was about control over a narrative. A story that people kept trying to rewrite, even when the person at the center of it had already spoken. Paris Jackson didn't create the controversy around her identity. She inherited it. And still, she has managed to stand in the middle of it and define herself on her own terms. So now it comes back to you. What really makes someone a parent? Is it biology alone? Or is it love, presence, and the life they build with you? And maybe more importantly, do you think the world will ever stop asking long enough to hear the answer that's already been given?